I dare say when you say movie stars who can sell tickets, there aren't that many of them. But the fact that Animal did so exceptionally well theatrically and then did as well on streaming tells you that there is an audience for it regardless of the platform. A film like Dev D, I think would definitely have done even way better theatrically, even relatively, right, today than it did then.
You can't really tell the Indian streaming story without talking to Sid Roy Kapur. One of the most respected producers in the business, he's backed more than 80 films according to his IMDb, including gems like Dangal, Barfi, Udaan, Pan Singh Tomar, and Haider. He now runs Roy Kapur Films, which has made numerous shows and movies for streaming, including Aranyak for Netflix and the excellent Rocket Boys for Sony Live. To bring in the new season of the Streaming Show podcast, Sid spoke to me about the current landscapes of both theatrical and streaming, the plight of smaller films, whether the golden age of Indian streaming is well and truly over, and his search to find India's answer to Squid Game. This video is brought to you by MUBI, a curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from around the world. You can get an entire month free at mubi.com/The Streaming Show. Sid, it is so wonderful to have you on The Streaming Show. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I have to start by telling you that every journalist has this sort of dream bucket list, wish list of people they want to interview once in their career. It's what we call the Shah Rukh Khan list. And you have absolutely always been on mine. There's something about the way you can talk about the creative aspects of storytelling, which I think great producers don't get enough credit for, but also the fact that you can speak to the larger industry and sort of where we're at. So glad we could be doing this.
So no pressure.
Yeah. That and the fact that you backed Jaga Jasoos, which I will maintain is a masterpiece till my dying breath.
Thank you.
But no, we are of course here to talk about streaming and how streaming has changed the game. You know, you of course at Roy Kapur Films have backed various shows and films for streaming. In terms of shows, there's also Aranyak for Netflix, of course, and Rocket Boys, which I love, for Sony Live. So I wanted to start there. You know, you're someone who's seen so much change and evolution in the industry. I think it's almost 2 decades of you in film. You started with Rang De Basanti, if I'm not wrong.
Right.
So in terms of just streaming, in terms of the last 6-7 years and how much the landscape has shifted, what do you think has changed the most in terms of how the industry functions and the kinds of stories that we're telling?
To start with, I think obviously the fact that talent has so many more avenues available to it to be able to shine, both for actors, for directors, for writers. You can tell so many stories that you probably were never, able to even conceive of being able to tell earlier. So that's one wonderful thing that streaming's done. The other thing, I suppose, is learning long format storytelling on the run, which we've had to do over the last few years. A lot of my colleagues that I speak to in the West, keep saying that we had 50 years to move from broadcast television and network television to cable, then going into the HBO world, and then moving into the streaming world. Writers had time to evolve into being showrunners. What's happened here is that, as with most things in India, we've gone from 0 to 100 and like that, and like at the top of no learning wheels on, as they put it, right? So I think our writers especially have had to really learn on the fly. And they've done a tremendous job at doing that. When you look at the stuff that was maybe coming out in streaming 5-7 years ago, and since you pretty much watch everything, I'm sure, the skills have improved so significantly. That's one. Two is just the ability to be able to keep audiences on their feet all the time. Some shows do it better than others, but I think we've really learned to be able to do that in long format storytelling much better than we were earlier. But from the consumer aspect, I guess, as we all know, what's changed is they now have the ability to be so much more on demand than they were earlier. We lived in a programmed environment in the past where it was a binary choice. Something's on, you watch it, you don't watch it. You have no choice in the matter. Today, the plethora of choices available have led to a situation where audiences are that much more demanding and content is that much more fungible. You earlier went to rent a DVD, you were making a commitment. Now I have to watch this. And that's all I can do because I have to return it the next day and I'm paying good money for it. But today you're flipping, you start watching something, you stop in 5 minutes. No loss to you. That's just 5 minutes of your life.
More pressure.
Exactly. And therefore, as a creator, you need to be that much more on the ball to be able to garner people's attention, coupled with the fact that they now have social media and they have reels and they have, all sorts of things that are also asking for their time.
I do think, I've always said this, I do think the finest Hindi language storytelling today is all on streaming, it's all on shows, whether it's writing, like you mentioned, performances and storytelling. I will come to that. First, I wanted to talk to you a bit about the downside of the streaming model and and sort of the streaming business model. There's something you said in an interview that said, where you said that I actually believe that what's happened with streaming services having come in, for all the incredible number of positives, is the fact that they don't really have a report card at the end of it, which we have to achieve theatrically, which does sometimes mean a level of indulgence and a level of just allowing yourself to be led along in whichever direction you want to go creatively, which does lead to maybe slightly lazier filmmaking at times. And you're someone who's, which I find very interesting, you're someone who's always talked about the upside of the tension between art and commerce, the fact that actually can lead to better storytelling. But in this world, is it that because there is no sort of transparency, because there are no figures, because a filmmaker or a production house is not accountable to that, it can lead to someone saying, look, I'm going to get paid anyway, so I'm just going to make the thing.
So one has to, to start with, obviously give some credence to the fact that people are not out to make bad work.
Of course.
Right? But yes, the fact is that if they don't have a very clear report card from the audience at the end, more than just, it's become part of the zeitgeist, it's now water cooler conversation, people are loving it on social media, all my friends are telling me it's great. That's nice, but you could also be living in a bubble. It's important to be able to have some objective authority telling you, did it work or didn't it work? And that is the streamer, ordinarily. But streamers in the past were much more reticent about sharing that information for, I guess, proprietary reasons. They didn't want to let out trade secrets, etc., etc. But I think that level of information flow is improving. And that can only help the creative process. Because now you have literally real-time data. I mean, if you had a creative person who was also very analytical, and there are a few of them, they'd want to actually know when drop-offs are happening, when people are choosing to get off, at what point in this episode did people start falling off, did my hook lead more people to watch the next episode? These are all really important creative sort of outcomes that would be great for people to be able to access, because that can only help their process as they move forward.
Do they give you access to that level of data for your projects? And is it healthy if they do? Because do you want to know that level of data if they turned off at this point?
I think it's important to at least get a general sense of it. I've never been a great fan of research when it comes to creative pieces of work. If it's going to be too dogged and too you get too sort of analytical about it and take the joy out of the creative process. But I do think that what is a process of focus groups, right? A process of focus groups is getting a whole bunch of people to watch your work in advance and then give you feedback. And there might be random strands of things that you can disregard completely. But if there are 2 or 3 common themes that are emerging from tens of people that you're showing it to, you have to acknowledge that. And that's helped us in the past when we've had this happen. It's something I've learned a lot from Amir as well, working on the number of films that we've done together, where he's so open to showing his films to so many people in advance. Now people can find that why are you doing this much research? Because it's something you want to say and you should just be able to go out and say it. But he's like, I'm making this for an audience. I want the audience to ultimately like it, and I want to be able to communicate what I think I was communicating and know that I'm not making mistakes along the way. And it's an art to be able to filter out all the noise and take those 2-3 strands of feedback that can really help your work. And I think to your question about whether streamers are sharing that, maybe not to that level of sort of minute detail yet, but they definitely are, with the experience they've garnered in what they've analyzed internally, being able to give you a certain amount of information with regard to what they believe are the cornerstones of an episode in terms of the way that it should play out. And there are, I think writers, if they approach the right way to be able to give them that feedback, are quite open to it.
I guess coming back to your example with Amir, even to your quote, I guess it comes down to don't forget the audience.
Yeah.
I guess the other big shift that seems to be taking place in the world of streaming right now, both here and abroad, is there's a lot of uncertainty within this landscape. You have budgets in India that have come crashing down from streamers. There's a lot of consolidation within the industry. There are sort of streamers going out of business and things like that. So with all of that in mind, there is this notion that the golden age of streaming in India is now over. Is that something that worries you, both in terms of not just the budgets coming down, but just the creative risk-taking of really telling great stories? Because we've had such interesting projects that we've seen over the last few years. So is that something that worries you at all? That the landscape really has shifted for the worse in some way?
Well, I am a bit of an eternal optimist, so I don't like to believe that, and I don't think that's true. I think we're definitely going through a phase right now where budgets have reduced, and fewer things are getting made than they were earlier, which might not necessarily be a bad thing. Because, I mean, when you reduce budget, sometimes it forces creators to think more inventively, more creatively, be more innovative in the way that they're telling the story. And when fewer things are getting made, that means that there's that much more rigor in the greenlighting process that maybe better things will get made as well. And having been doing things as long as one has, you realize that these things tend to be cyclical. So we might be going through this phase at this point of time, which is not to say that that's going to be the same a year from now or 2 years from now. There was probably a time when too much was getting made, and too many things that should not have gotten greenlit were getting made purely because you needed to fill volume. And the profitability motive is not a bad thing. There was a bit of a land grab when it came to let's get more subscribers, and the street was rewarding you for it, in the West. And now the street is saying, no, but now we want
make money.
Please make some money as well while you're garnering those subscribers. And so naturally, streamers have now gotten much more circumspect about costs. It can't be a bad thing in the long run for the health of the industry.
But in terms of the health of the industry, just given that everyone is now trying to make money, the streamers as they should, given that there are mergers and sort of, you have Jio took over Hotstar, Sony and Zee maybe almost did merge and things like that. So does that not make in terms of the streaming space, do you not need as many players and buyers as possible for a healthy film industry? So does consolidation worry you at all, just given that it's happening in the West and it could happen here because very few people are really making money in this world?
It was bound to happen. There were, I mean, at last count, I think a couple of years ago, there were 34 OTT platforms simultaneously. And the market just is not there to support that number of platforms. I mean, you've got 10% of the total population of the country actually paying for at least one streaming platform. That's it. There's just only 10% actually paying for one streaming platform. And the addressable market in India is not as large as our population. It's a very significantly lower percentage of our population. So it was bound to happen. The men were bound to be separated from the boys and all that.
The correction.
Yeah, exactly. I think this year is going to be a year of consolidation where whatever the merged entities are going to, settle down into the new equation, are going to figure themselves out. And that period of time might tend to be a time when fewer things happen. But I do think that with the level of investment that's been committed to the market over the next 12 months to 18 months to 24 months, once water finds its own level and once things settle down, there's going to be a lot more, stuff that gets made.
I will absolutely take some of that optimism. But do you feel that's another thing that a lot of people say that is part of the problem that with the big streamers in India, Netflix, Amazon, etc., is streaming and sort of the 10 episode show that we love, that I'm very grateful to watch. Is it a very top 10% of India thing? Like the fact is that you really are just catering to that. Is that something that you feel is true?
That is probably true. I think especially when it comes to the more dystopian and more esoteric sort of content that got made. No, I'm not talking about whether good or bad. It probably didn't cater to as wide a market as it should have. And that was, again, everyone learning their lessons in the initial period of streaming because that was the stuff being made in the West. So it just felt natural for us to be making it as well. But I do think everyone realizes that you need to go a little more mainstream than we were earlier. And this term TV Plus is being bandied around a lot, which I think scares a lot of people because they feel, are we going back to saying it's just GC? But I don't think that's true. I think once everyone's tasted blood, everyone's going to want all kinds of content. So when the streamer says TV Plus, what they also mean is that make it at lower budgets. They don't necessarily mean make content that's regressive or that's not as interesting or compelling as you were making earlier. So the genres might have tended to be, especially the ones that were more dystopian or esoteric, those might not get made as much. But I think we're moving into an area where accessibility is going to be very important because for the next generation of subscribers to come onto the platforms, you need to be able to make stuff that appeals to them. And therefore, we need to challenge ourselves to say, let's tell the stories we want to tell, but in a way that's more accessible.
I was actually going to ask you about that because there is this big fear within the industry as well with sort of the Geo Mammoth coming in, that there's a lot of talk about how they just want 100-episode shows for that sort of a family friendly. So it makes you wonder, is the future of streaming just regular TV? Are we just going backwards? But again, I will absolutely take some of that optimism.
It could be, and a lot of people could see it like that, but it's on us to say that we can do both, right? It's not like you can't make something that's family friendly, that's also very appealing, and that speaks to the stories that you want to tell. Ted Lasso is family friendly,
absolutely,
but it's great content as well. It's nice, it's clean, it's fun, it's wholesome, it's all those things. but it's also accessible.
And it's very popular.
Exactly. So you need to be able to look at those gold standards of that zone and say, okay, let's challenge ourselves to do that.
I guess everybody wants that one show, project, or movie that cuts across all the demographics.
Exactly.
I also want to talk to you about stars on streaming, because, that is obviously the other big trend of the last 2 years, in shows like The Hard, Night Manager. We had Rudra a few years ago, Farzi, Citadel now, Hira Mandi as well. So you have sort of big stars jumping on streaming. And it's interesting because one of the things I love most about streaming and shows specifically, which I think is where it's really made a seismic difference, is casting. We have such exciting acting talent, new faces we've never seen. It really feels like the golden era for them. But then you also have these big stars coming in, and at the same time you have budgets coming down, which makes you wonder, will we have a lot of star-backed projects? But do you think you need, especially at a time like today, do you think you need big stars on streaming for shows? Because, I was talking to someone at a streamer a year ago, and they said that increasingly those big known faces really are necessary, just to rise above the noise. So how important do you think stars are on streaming?
We are a star-driven culture. There's no running away from that. I mean, stars sell tickets, so there's no reason not to believe that stars will help more clicks on, on sort of one of those little windows that you see on your screens, right? So it's just natural. Now, will stars only want to be doing streaming? I don't think so. So it might be a little alarmist for anyone to believe that stars coming in will mean that interesting casting won't happen, because even in the shows that you mentioned, like a Farzi or like a Night Manager, you had great supporting casts as well. You had some great parts being played by those who won the stars. And so that will continue. And then alongside that, you've got great shows that don't have stars in them too. So there will be a coexistence. And I dare say, when you say movie stars who can sell tickets, there aren't that many of them. And a lot of them want to do theatrical as well. So I don't think we need to be worried about the fact that streaming will be overrun by them, anytime soon.
So you think the sacred acting talent, the next Scam, the Pata Loks, the Family Mans of the world, which really recognize talent, you think they're here to stay?
I think so. I do believe that.
You also mentioned sort of, YouTube and Instagram. You said that, that is what you're competing with. As somebody who started their career in marketing, is it harder than ever to grab eyeballs today, whether it's a show or a film?
We are competing with a generation that's jaded by being inundated with marketing messages. And so therefore the ability to get through to them, if you're going to be doing something really cookie cutter, is that much lower. You're not going to be able to reach them because they will disregard manufacturer speak, as we call it, right? You need to be really inventive in the way that you get to them. And you need to be authentic. You need to not come across to them as selling. You need to make even the content that you're marketing to them really interesting and sort of entertaining at the same time.
A lot of pressure.
And that's the challenge.
There's something, I think in Netflix, they have that term, what do they call it? A gourmet cheeseburger. And there's a lot of coverage around, at least they talk about it in the US, how they program for ambient viewing. They're programming shows for knowing some kid is going to be on their phone, so you have it on in the background, which is interesting and slightly tragic, but I guess that is the way of the world.
Yeah, I'm not sure any writer or director would like their piece of work to be called ambient viewing. So I'm sure they're not selling that to any of the creatives,
of course,
for sure. And it's just not a term that I think makes you feel very good about content at all. But we have to acknowledge that there is the culture of just having the noise of some form of entertainment behind you. I mean, earlier it used to be just music. But now it's like a drone of something going on in the background. And I don't think anyone intends to go out and create that. But there's a lot of that stuff being created too.
And I mean, there is a lot to be said about comfort viewing, but it is very scary to think of that. I also want to talk to you a bit about the state of the theatrical industry, specifically smaller films, because, it's been an interesting year. It felt like, correct me if I'm wrong, 2023, the big narrative was it's massive star-led blockbusters and people are back to theaters, which is very encouraging. And in 2024 so far, we've had a lot of very interesting small films on the big screen, which in itself is a big triumph. Stuff like Fairy Folk, Madgaon Express, Lapata Ladies, Do Pyar recently as well. But if you look at the absolute numbers, they're not the most encouraging. And Nikhil Advani said something, on our podcast when we spoke to him. He said that you couldn't make Udaan today, which is obviously a film that you backed. Like you wouldn't know what to do with it. So where are we at in terms of the small films, which you have backed many in your career, and most people will tell you are their favorite films. What does that film do today?
So we do tend to romanticize the past a little bit because, I mean, even a film like Udan, as proud as we are of it, didn't do that well theatrically, right? But I think if you're able to find the right commercial framework that you make a film like that, and that film was made for all of 2 crores, right? And we spent some money on marketing it as well. And with the non-theatrical deals and theatrical, we were able to recover our investment. But if you purely looked at theatrical, that film didn't do all that well because it was... That hasn't changed. But look at the stature the film has received today, and look at the fact that that launched the career of one of the directors that we love the most today, and that launched, you know, that genre of filmmaking, which was so personal and so sort of coming of age. So you do tend to have to accept that smaller films are always going to find it harder theatrically. So the golden era that we like to romanticize was also a pretty tough era for smaller films. Now, what's changed with streaming is that these films have at least found a new home to be able to be loved and enjoyed, and to be able to actually make some money on a non-theatrical basis that earlier they didn't have the advantage of being able to do.
Interesting.
Right? So I actually look at it as, okay, theatrically it was also really hard for them. Now they have a non-theatrical home too, and they will live and exist on those platforms forever to be loved and enjoyed over generations, because that's what filmmakers would want from them. And I hold on to films like 12 Fail and say, look at that, right?
Which I feel is keeping the hopes of half the industry alive.
Exactly, but it's real hope. To go from 1 crore to more than 60 crores means that is the power of pure cinema. Now, yes, films like that don't come around very often. It's just such a beautiful film. And it's not easy to decide that I'll go out and make 12 Fail. But if the bar's that high, then we need to take that on as a challenge and say, let's go out and continue making smaller films alongside the big ticket blockbusters, and find the right distribution platforms for them, be able to be commercially savvy about how we're able to recover our investment in those, but don't give up on them.
I was tempted to play a game with you where I just name some of the wonderful smaller films that you have backed, to ask you what you would do with them today. So films like Mumbai Meri Jaan, A Wednesday, Oi Lucky Lucky Oi, Devdi, Udan, Pan Singh Tomar, Lunchbox. If you were making these today, would you, again, do you think there is a space for them theatrically? Would you go about them differently? I'm just curious to know what those films would look like.
So for a few of them, there is still a space theatrically, I do believe. So a film like Devdi, I think would definitely have done even way better theatrically, even relatively, right, today than it did then. Because I do think that youth audience is looking for things that break through the clutter, that are able to, create a stir, become, part of the zeitgeist. So I'd say definitely a film like that. Mumbai Meri Jaan even then didn't do all that well. It's something we were so proud of and are so proud of having made, but it didn't do that well theatrically even then. The Lunchbox, I think, would do well whenever you release that film. It was another film like the equivalent of what we discussed with 12 Fail, you know, just one of those special movies that's going to do well theatrically, regardless of the environment. Oi Lucky Lucky Oi, again, I remember released on 28/11, 2 days after 26/11. And that was just really tragic because we'd already sent our prints out internationally, and at that time, once your prints are out, then that piracy is going to hit you on the weekend anyway. So we had to release it. But again, the amount of love that garnered post its theatrical run was actually that much more. So again, that is a film that I think would do better today theatrically than it did then. Which were the other ones you mentioned?
I think the Pan Singh Tomar as well.
Pan Singh Tomar, again, maybe I'm sounding like a ridiculous optimist, but I do think that these are films. I do think these are films that can still do very, very well theatrically. When you've got a high concept idea like Devdi or like Pan Singh Tomar, patriotic athlete from the Indian Army representing his country turns into a dacoit. That's really high concept. That I think would have, and Irfan playing it, right, would have done exceptionally well today, even better than it did then. It's the ones that are the more difficult to define, the ones that are slightly more delicate, that are the light romances or the light dramas or the subtler comedies.
How would you describe Barfi? That came to mind when you said that.
Exactly. Again, it helps to have Ranbir and Priyanka in the film, and that great music by Pritam. That's what helps to make it theatrical. But those are the ones that are finding it more difficult, because those are the ones that audiences are saying, okay, I've heard great things, but I can wait 8 weeks. It'll be on a platform soon. That intensity to have to buy that movie ticket to watch a film is driven by something that makes you feel like you cannot not watch that, because otherwise you'll be out of the cultural conversation in that moment.
I guess the question is, apart from whether they would do well today, and it really is very heartening to know that you feel some of them would do even better today, is whether they would even get made today. I guess that's the big fear, because it feels like some of these films, if they were made today, they would be shows. Shows are the new mid-budget film.
Fair enough.
The other thing I wanted to know is, do you think we've shot ourselves in the foot in terms of how we're conditioning the audience? I'm going to quote a tweet of mine, because without wanting to sound like a jackass, but I just basically said that I hate how much streaming has conditioned us as audiences to think about how films should be released. Distribution is none of our business. You watch a well-intentioned, sincere drama made for grown-ups on the big screen and instinctively think, I don't know if this will do well. They should have released on streaming. Again, it is none of our business, but have we literally conditioned our audience to be like, this is a competent, mature movie which doesn't have pan-India, next to it, or a big spy universe next to it. So people are just telling themselves they're going to watch it on streaming.
So I see, for those of us in the industry, I mean, I don't blame you for thinking that way. You're in the industry and you're thinking these things all the time because they're relevant to the business that you're in. But even for a regular audience, right, who's had to sit at home for 2 years, watching things on streaming and learning how convenient it is to be able to access content so easily, for them also, the fact is that when they go and watch a movie in the cinema hall that they enjoy, but which they feel, I could have waited 8 weeks to watch that. I didn't really need to pay that $1,000 for a movie ticket to watch it. That's just a fact of life. That's where we are today, right? And that's happened because of a pandemic. It's happened because of technology. It's happened for various reasons. So I don't necessarily know whether we've done it to ourselves, but it's happened to us. So today, that bar is that much higher. For something to be theatrically, compelling or cinematic, you have to be able to give people a reason to come in. Otherwise, it's not like they won't like your film, but they'll just wait.
But even in terms of waiting, I heard something recently, which I don't know why it surprised me, but it really did, that the most successful, not even films, things on major platforms are not the big show, are not the straight to streaming film. It is the major theatrical success. It's the movie that you think everyone has seen. It is Animal, it is Jawan, it is Pathaan. Those are the films that people go nuts for on streaming. Even a 12th Fail, films that you think have got a really sort of decent viewership theatrically, really explode online. And I mean, I guess it's obvious to some degree, but I found it quite sad to the extent where, like, is that what people, like, the greatest marketing strategy is just a big theatrical release?
I guess that's just testament to what people's tastes are. And we have to accept it. That's our audience, right? And so the fact that Animal did so exceptionally well theatrically and then did as well on streaming tells you that there is an audience for it regardless of the platform. And that film has worked, right? So we have to accept that. But it's never like that's not been the case in the past. The exceptions have always proved the rule. So even when you discussed a film like Barfi, Barfi was always counted as an exception. That you had a deaf-mute hero, you had an autistic, heroine, you had a newcomer in as the third wheel. It was a on paper a tough film, and then it worked theatrically. But that's not because films like that were working. Films like that were not working, and this one happened to work. So that's no different. It's just that the bar has definitely gone up.
That's one of those films where I'll never forget the feeling of walking out of that theater. It's just so much joy you feel. But no, just in terms of I think like Animal, my prediction is that once we get the end of your Netflix numbers, my prediction is it'll be one of the most watched Indian things on Netflix ever.
Probably.
Yeah. Because the way that... But coming back to the theatrical world, do you think... There's a lot of talk right now about... Do you think the theatrical... movie theaters themselves need to evolve or change in some way? There's a lot of talk of people saying, why don't you show cricket matches in theaters, concerts, they've started that in the US to some degree, alternative things, because are you conditioning people? So is that something that you feel, or obviously there's the big ticket price debate as well, but do you feel like movie theaters need to sort of reinvent themselves to some degree to bring the audience in? Or is it all dependent on we need to make good films and it's nothing to do with the theaters?
It's a combination of both. I think anyone in the exhibition sector will tell you that they're making large strides ahead in trying to make them experience zones, trying to make them a place that seamlessly you go from a mall into a movie theater and you have an experience in the movie theater as well. You have some gaming stuff happening. You've got gourmet food, or you've got really great fast food.
Sounds expensive.
And it's meant to be. And then you have a movie experience as well, where you've got either 3D or you've got 4DX, and you've got great sound, and you've got all those things that make up for a great outing, right? And therefore, that's a reason for people to get off their couches and come and take the effort, which is all good. I don't think that's a bad thing. But I do think that given how underscreened we are as a market, we have the opportunity to do a lot in the underscreened areas in a more efficient, modular, clean, efficient, smart way that makes sure that audiences who don't have access to movie halls are able to get that. And if there is a model that comes up in the next few years where that can happen, then I do think that our theatrical box office will definitely grow.
One thing I've always wondered about this underscreen thing, which is something you've talked about a lot, how underscreened India is as a nation, number of screens per person, etc. But on the flip side, you also see that movie theaters aren't making money. I mean, they're not exactly. So how does that dichotomy work?
So you're right. It is a dichotomy, but that's also because we're oversaturated in certain places and completely underscreened in certain places. There's a lot of lumpiness to the penetration. So when you look at the metros and the mini metros, you sometimes have within 1 square kilometer, you've got like 30 screens, right? Or more. And therefore, like obviously those screens are going to be, you will have lower occupancies there. But there are large swathes of large states that just have no screens. Now, are those people not interested in watching a movie in the theater? I doubt that. So obviously the exhibition sector has done a lot more research on this and hopefully will look into it more as we go along. But I do think that there is an opportunity out there because we are a nation that enjoys the movie going experience. So why not give that to more people who don't have it?
I mean, that sounds like a wonderful ideal world. I want to look ahead with you briefly to just get some predictions on where you think the streaming space will be, say, 2 to 3 years from now, or even 5 years from now. How many, if you were to look at that world, how many platforms do you think there are? What kind of things are getting made at that point? Where do you think we'll be?
I wish I had a crystal ball to be able to tell you all this and sound like some
educated guess.
Yeah. Well, it's just things change so fast, right, in this area that it's really hard to even make an educated guess. But I'll make a stab at it. One is I do think consolidation is a fact, and we're seeing it happen already. There will be fewer streaming services, but they'll be bigger, they'll be more profitable. That transition, and here I'm talking on a global basis, from that cable bundle moving into the streaming platform situation, just in terms of the financials, is going to take a little while because that cable bundle was such a lucrative thing that the industry is losing out on a year-by-year basis, and streaming is not making up for it as fast. And people are getting much more choices. You hear a lot about people now deactivating their subscriptions after having watched the season of something they wanted to watch, and then activating another service because there's a show that's coming in there. And that actually goes back to the way that channels were viewed in the past. Except that with channels, you had to pay for the whole bundle on a monthly basis. So you made money anyway, even if your channel was not that viewed. Maybe you made less money, but you still had that annuity income coming in. Here, as a streamer, you're only as good as this show that you're putting out.
That's why Hotstar is splitting all their shows into 2 parts.
Right, exactly. So it is going to be more and more difficult, and it will be survival of the fittest in that sense. You're now not going to be able to benefit from being in a bundle of other services. You're going to have to sink or swim on your own. And therefore, the first movers are going to have much more advantage. And the first movers who've proven that they can actually be profitable, like someone like Netflix.
I think they're the only profitable streaming platform.
At this point of time, but you will have, of course, you'll have Apple TV, you'll have Amazon, you'll have Disney.
The ones who do streaming for a hobby.
All the players who've got the financial wherewithal to keep going and to keep making it happen, and have been fairly successful as well. So there will be fewer streaming services, number one. Number two, theatrical is not going anywhere. Last year did show us that while we grew incredibly well theatrically, the top 10 films accounted for as much as 40% of the box office, which means your bigger ticket blockbusters and tentpoles are still going to be increasingly very important. But the smaller films will also come and be able to make a mark if they are, cinematically
we need
sound.
12th fails.
We need more of those, exactly.
But in terms of what is in your control, I'm a writer. I'm pitching to you guys for a show that I guess would get made 2 years from now. What should I be pitching? What is the flavor of the season? Is it still all crime? Is it still 8 to 10 episodes if you are programming for 2-3 years from now? What do you think?
So, we shouldn't base anything on flavors of the season because they keep changing every season by their very nature. I think if it's compelling, if it's unique, if it's different and is accessible, those are the key, right? Genres, become up and down depending on what's worked over the last 3 months. But I think if you're able to surprise development executives who are reading multiple pitches every day with something that's just really unique and interesting, and something that is not too precious about itself, where it's being inaccessible just for the sake of it. That's something that I think we would all respond to.
Is it fair to say it should be unique to the right extent? So something that's packaged like something that's already made, but is doing something different within that, versus something radically different.
If it can be surprising, if it's surprising in a good way, right? Not surprising for the sake of being surprising. It needs to be, because if it's one more crime drama, then that makes no sense. But if it's a crime drama that just comes out of left field and just spins something in a completely different way, then that's interesting.
I also want to talk to you about all the shows that you guys have announced. You had a big sort of slate announcement, I think it was a couple of years ago. There was Nagraj Manjule's Matka King, which you said is getting into production soon, which we're very excited for. There was a sci-fi series from Aarti Kadav, Mahesh Narayan, spy thriller. Bhavesh Kapadia will be doing a female-led comic thriller series. Anubhav Chopra will be doing a young adult drama series, and Hardik Mehta will be doing a family drama set across the world. And also you have obviously the writer Jeremy Brock will be adapting Anarchy. So of all of these, tell us what's happening.
So I really don't want to talk about the ones that are not officially announced yet, but what I can tell you is that most of those are in active development right now.
It's a very diverse
at various stages of development. And we'll make the announcements at the right time, because it's just never good to jump the gun beyond a point. We made the announcement that we're doing them, and now we'd like to make the next announcement be who we're doing them with.
Okay.
So
any other new ones you want to throw at us?
No, not for now. But there's a lot of very, very exciting stuff in development.
I have to say, this is a very exciting list of not just in terms of genre and idea, but just in terms of talent as well. So no, it sounds very, very exciting. So we look forward to them. I do want to ask you about the idea of, in a world where a platform is commissioning shows. Correct me if I'm wrong, your shows are all commissioned. The IP sits with the platform. There is this big fear, again, recently of the idea that platforms dropping shows. It's not happened in India, touch wood. But, when streaming happened and started, there was this sort of unsaid rule, this hope, this contract that the show will now exist forever on fancy internet platform. And then you've seen in the US, there are shows getting dropped for various reasons. Is that something that worries you? And then does the idea of IP then scare you? Because to me, it's insanely scary that a lot of artists have put together something, over years and put their life into something. And the idea that it's in somebody else's control. So does the IP world worry you at all?
Less worry and more just with regard to the fact that you do want that work to be accessible and available to people for eternity, because that's the reason that you've created it. And if it's going to be for some financial accounting purposes that it's taken off a platform because now it just doesn't, it makes more sense to have it off than on, purely because of the residuals associated with it, etc. That is sad, and that is tragic for the creative, people involved. So I hope that is a rarity, and I think it is a rarity rather than and we can discuss examples of that. The fact that we can even discuss specific examples means it's not happening as much, which I think I hope is the norm.
But what if a platform just goes out of business?
Well, what often happens when they go out of business is they sell their library to someone else, because that IP is worth something. So it often doesn't vanish into the ether. It lands up on another platform.
And we just hope it lands up somewhere meaningful.
Somewhere accessible and meaningful,
and just lastly, if there's one thing you could change about the streaming landscape as it operates, I'm going to change that question. If tomorrow you started your own streaming platform, if I'm giving you ideas, please take them. But if you started your own major streaming platform, is there one thing you would do in terms of how you operate that is different from the way things are run right now?
Yeah, that would be really presumptuous of me to suddenly come up with an answer that a lot of very smart people running streaming platforms haven't come up with yet. So I'm not gonna. No, it's. Really nothing comes to mind that's so. And it's really banal, but it's true. I mean, I just try to create great stuff, which everyone's trying to do, right? But that's really at the heart of it. I mean, have a great user interface, which I think a lot of people are still trying to get right.
The ones who care seem to have a good one.
And that I think adds so much to the viewing experience. So that is one. And two is just, be able to provide people an array of content so they just don't unsubscribe to your service. But that's like basic. What I think as a producer I really want to do, right, is I want us as the Indian content creation fraternity to be able to make something that is able to go out into the world and is able to actually break through this barrier that we have of reaching out only to the South Asian diaspora, that's able to break that and become part of the global sort of conversation, the way that Korea's managed to do so well.
We were just talking about Shogun as well.
Exactly. So shows like Shogun, shows like, shows like Money Heist, shows like Squid Game.
Squid Game being
the fact that they can actually go across cultural barriers and are able to reach out to audiences in the way they have. That Indian moment needs to happen. I hope that happens soon.
Conceptually, on paper, Anarchy does sound like it has all the makings of that.
So the idea really of that one is that any country that's ever been a colonizer or has ever been colonized, which pretty much includes the whole world, should find something to relate to there.
Yeah.
Because it's effectively the first time that in history, and we talk a lot about nation corporations today, corporations that are effectively like nations like Apple and Google and Microsoft, and you had a company controlling a subcontinent with its own private army, from the 1700s onwards, and it happened here in our own country. So just the very fact that penny dropping for the whole world to realize that, oh wow, this was actually a company that was controlling a subcontinent. And there's such wonderful characters there. On the British side, on the Indian side, on the, on all sides, you have the French and the Dutch, and you have all these wonderful, delicious characters. I think it makes for a great show. It's really about getting it right.
I think you said in an interview, correct me if I'm wrong, that the East India Company started from a small room.
Yeah, on the 4th floor of a building in London.
Yeah.
And it remained like that for a really long time. And effectively, a few executives sitting in that boardroom were controlling,
Sounds like an interesting story.
A large percentage of the population of the world.
Yeah. No, it sounds like a fascinating story. But no, thank you so much for doing this and giving us a bit of optimism, because we could already use it. It does feel like a bit of an uncertain time. So I'm so grateful to get your perspective. And we really look forward to the slate. It sounds very exciting and very diverse. And we look forward to everything you have left to give us.
Thank you.
I hope you guys got as much out of this conversation as I did. You can catch the entire first season of the Streaming Show podcast on Spotify and on all major podcast platforms. Before we go, a quick word on MUBI. MUBI is a one-stop shop streaming service dedicated to great cinema from across the world. You can get an entire month free at mubi.com/The Streaming Show. This week, I highly recommend you check out Anmol Sidhu's quietly devastating directorial debut, Jaggi. Set in the rural heartland of Punjab, Jaggi follows a boy suffering from impotence who's then shunned, used, and sexually abused by those around him. Poignant and unnerving, Jaggi is a piercing punch-to-the-gut interrogation of hypermasculinity, repression, and sexuality, with Jaggi's harrowing predicament juxtaposed against the vast open landscape of rural Punjab. You can watch the hauntingly powerful drama exclusively on MUBI.